Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Absolutely Not. I am your host, Katrina Stroll. I am a certified career coach and HR consultant who created this space because so many professionals out there have difficulties setting boundaries at work. And I just don't want you to have difficulties doing that anymore. So I bring resources onto the show so I can ask them about their experiences setting boundaries so we can both learn from them together. Before we dive into today's topic, I like to define words that we use frequently on the show. The first being boundary. My special guest today shared with me a boundary of not placing their work email on their phone. I know, right? So easy to say, but it's a really big boundary for a lot of us. Gaslighting, to manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. For example, if you go up to your manager and say, hey, Bob, Jill, George was being really offensive in the break room. Could you go talk to them real quick? And your manager says, I've never heard Bob, Jill, or George talk like that. Are you sure that's what you heard? That's gaslighting. Dismissive, showing that something is unworthy of consideration. Once again, my special guest shared an amazing example of when you bring a concern to your manager or a coworker and they kind of laugh at it or chuckle at it and then move forward quickly. They don't even consider it something they should be concerned with. I know. And I felt that in my chest because that's something I've experienced before, and we're gonna get into it today. Today's episode is entitled, Y'all Hiring? I know, what a good episode title. I'm super excited to dive into it. And our special guest today is gonna talk about why it's entitled that. My special guest today is Albert Phillips Jr. Albert is the founder and CEO of Free Black Mind Educational Group, LLC, a company that creates educational resources for Black youth. He specializes in urban education and youth development. Albert earned a Master of Science degree in education from Johns Hopkins University and a Bachelor of Science degree in journalism from Morgan State University. Albert resides in Baltimore. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be on your show.
And I'm excited for you to be here. Could you talk about the title of today's episode, Y'all Hiring?
Yeah, 1,000%. So Y'all Hiring is actually the title of my new book. I guess I can still call it my new book. Y'all Hiring, the Black Teen's Guide to Navigating Employment. And it's a book that I released October of last year during a pandemic, which we're still in. But I released it because I wanted to provide Black youth a guide to employment in a way that I felt like was missing. In my work in workforce development, a lot of the tools and the resources that we were sharing with our young people were just not culturally competent. They weren't real world enough. They didn't speak the language and connect to the young people in a way that I really wanted it to. And so I decided to try my luck and write my own book and use a lot of information that I learned along the way. And in the book, you'll also learn about my teenage employment journey, or at least some of it. It's hard to put it all in one book, but I encourage you to check it out at y'allhiring.com.
Oh, that's amazing. And I'm so happy that you wrote a book it's on something that so many of us could have used in our teen lives, me, myself included. So does Y'all Hiring kind of touch on setting boundaries before moving into new organizations?
Yeah, so a lot of the book, the undertone of it is like empowerment, which I feel like is the opposite of a lot of employment stuff. A lot of employment stuff is very competitive, it's very combative, it's divisive, I feel like in some ways. But in the book, I try to empower young people while also educating them about employment. So when it comes to setting boundaries, I believe that a core part of that is knowing who you are and knowing your value, your standards, and what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do even before getting a job. Like some of that has to be established, at least in my opinion, before walking into the workplace. Of course, you'll get more of that as you're there and as you transition as a professional. But in the book, I do encourage young people to know who they are, right, as a strategy of setting boundaries.
My gosh, I love that you touched on the current job search methods and how they don't really empower you to be the individual that you are. I've never thought of it in that sense. So thank you so much for bringing that to the table. Um, the empowerment piece of setting boundaries is great. Are you currently setting boundaries in your life?
Yeah, all the time. I feel like it's a practice, right? It's not like a boom, I hit it, I'm good, right? It's not a stop, but it's an ongoing practice that I'm always trying to figure out new ways and new things to do in order just to ultimately be the best person that I can be. Like beyond a job, I care about myself as a person, and that's something that I'm trying to do more and more with with setting boundaries and other things. So currently, as you mentioned earlier, I decided even before I got this job to not put my work emails on my phone. And I know everybody does it. It's just like a natural practice when you get a new job. Well, let me set it up. But I've done that at every job except the one that I'm at. And I saw the results of that. I saw myself on the weekends getting up early in the morning, like, oh, let me check this. Oh, this is another task. I'm making notes to myself on like Saturday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning to do something on Monday when I go into work. I'm like, that's not productive. It's not good for my mindset. And it's not good for me as an employee. So that's just something that I personally decided not to do. And that's a boundary that I set. And I'm happy I did it. It worked out.
I'm happy for you as well. I love that you said that's something you had to recognize in yourself, that you were doing that on Saturday. You were taking notes, you were looking at emails real quick. So before that, before you recognizing it in yourself, there's nobody else who's going to be like, hey man, don't put that on your phone. Like try to make sure your boundaries are in place. It has to start with you. That's awesome. You mentioned practice, and I love that because I don't know why it reminds me of that. We talking about the game that excuse me, but practice is a word that reminds us that it's ongoing. It's not something that we're going to be a pro at out the gate. Once you say, okay, I'm going to set boundaries in my life. No, it needs practice. You have to hone this skill. Um, how skilled are you right now? Do you have difficulties or are you a pro right now?
When it comes to setting boundaries,
Yes.
I don't know about pro. That it's hard for me to carry that title, but I feel like I'm getting better. It's crazy because during a pandemic, right? Like it caused people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, and it caused people to have to deal with things that they wouldn't typically have to deal with outside of a pandemic or outside of like working from home all the time. And so, like when a pandemic first started and I started working from home, like I feel like people didn't understand my work schedule anymore. And so I might have family members, friends just calling me at like all like random times. And I'm like, no, I'm really at work. I know I'm home, but I'm really working. Like I'm trying to get stuff done. I'm trying to project plan. I'm trying to do this. And it's like I had to create a boundary of like letting people know like, hey, during these times, right? I know your schedule might be flexible, but I can call you during my lunch break, you know what I'm saying, or something like that. But I can't just on a whim just pick up at all times of the day. Um, and so I'm still trying to get better with that, and not just that practice, but in general, just understanding, how best to work right now that's most beneficial for me. And even thinking about the transition that's about to happen. Some companies are deciding to continue to allow employees to work from home, while other ones are like, all right, let's ramp this thing up so you can come on back in the office. So that's another transition, right? I started a new job in the middle of the pandemic, which was like crazy because I think uh, out of all of the coworkers that I work with now, I've only met like three of them in person. So it's like I'm all of these people who I'm building relationships through a screen, uh, which is just weird. So like I said earlier, boundary setting is an ongoing practice, and I'm trying to get better with it every day.
And I love that. And the empowerment part of your book is definitely going to help other people to set boundaries, like you said, before they go into organizations or even when they're a part of organizations. Um, so you are a semi-pro at setting boundaries. Could you talk about a time that you have had difficulty setting boundaries at work?
Yeah. So at work, you can easily get bogged down with 100 projects, 100 tasks, 100 things to do, right? And productivity is still at an all-time high. That's one of the things I don't like right now is that um, even during the pandemic, like a lot of jobs still expected their employees to continue to perform at the same level that they were like when they were in the office or in the workplace or whatever, in the midst of so much going on.
Mhm.
It's like things didn't slow down, maybe in certain industries, certain areas, but everything didn't like universally slow down to give people enough space to pause and to breathe, to take care of themselves, take care of their families. Um, and so for me, one of the difficulties has been just just understanding. This is even beyond just my job, really, but even just understanding like when to cut things off, right? When to say, all right, this is the end of my workday. This is the end of this task for today. I'll get to it tomorrow. And even talking to my supervisor and working with her and helping her to understand like the capacity of employees. She's very understanding. She's great, but just in general, like jobs have to understand the capacity of employees, like how much they can do, especially like all at the same time, because there's so much going on at every given second. But sometimes employees have to speak up and say like, "Hey, I got 50 things here. I
Mhm.
can't add another 50." You know what I'm saying? Like, let's let's talk about deadlines. Let's maybe restructure some things and some employees will be open to that, some won't. But that's another part of boundary setting, like just understanding like what your capacity is and how much you can do. Because you might have, some people I know they might have a child in the other room. They trying to help the child with schoolwork, make sure they logged on while they're on the computer, and then something else is going on, trying to make lunch, dinner. It's just all types of things going on going on in the household. And so, I found that my job has been understanding, if, hey, I got to run out to get some medication for my grandma because, she need her medication, I don't know why she just called me 5 minutes ago, but that's my grandma, you know what I'm saying? Like, regardless, I'm gonna support her. So just different things like that. Fortunately, my job has been understanding, but I know some people who haven't,
Mhm.
so it's tough.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so glad that your organization is understanding. I love that you use the word capacity because I think I use the word limits a lot, expectations, but capacity means a lot to me because you paired it with individuals. Um, every single individual in each organization has a different capacity. And I think when we were all in the office, people didn't really talk about that much. Like maybe Susan had a picture of her kid, but then maybe you didn't know that Greg also has kids. And now that Greg works at home, he has to take care of those kids. So, yeah, the capacity has changed so much of what we can do. I also started a job during the pandemic, and I remember my boss just being like, "Here, go a laptop, like go, like do your job at home," not knowing that like there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. This little laptop is not going to hold us afloat while I have to also take care of my son, cook dinner, and change diapers.
Right.
Wow, that's so very insightful. See, and this is why you're here, so we can learn about it. What got you excited, or what kind of pushed you to the point beyond the pandemic to say, "Hey, I have to cut things off. I have to make sure these boundaries are in place."
Yeah, I mean, for some people, their job defines them.
Oh,
Um, my job is a part of who I am, is a huge part of who I am, but it doesn't just define. It's not my totality, and so I have to understand that sometimes, I've been reading a lot more, and that's something that I enjoy doing, and I can't be stuck on my screen if I want to read, right? I'm trying to exercise more. I can't be thinking about work or working on an assignment when I need to take care of my physical health, reduce some stress in my life. So I just have to again value myself. And so that's like I said, beyond the pandemic, my self-value has risen. I feel like over the last maybe year or so, just naturally. And so that's gonna show up in different ways. And one of those ways is saying, hey, I got to pause on work, for today, this is the limit. And that time might change. Some days it might be 5, Some days it might be a little later than that. Like I'm really trying to crush something out. But on the weekends, I got other things going on, right? I have family, I have friends, I have other commitments, I have other things that I value. So that can't be my whole life,
Mm,
right? And I know some people who they allow that job to be their whole life.
mm.
And some people find they love it. Like they find value in getting up 1, 2 in the morning and working on projects. I'm just like, look, I that's not me. And that doesn't mean that I'm not as dedicated as you, but we just got two different vantage points when it comes to this job thing. And so that's something that I've just been conscious about, and I want to continue to be conscious about, um, you know, as I continue to grow as a professional.
Right. The the phrase that you use, you said some of those people find value in their work. Like that's what the only kind of the only place where they can see the value coming from it within their life. And that really makes my heart hurt, but it also reminds me of a time when that was me. Without boundaries, that was me. I only found value through the work that I was doing for an organization. For anybody listening out there, it is so important what Albert said. You need to find value in yourself and what you're doing for yourself. Because let me tell you, that job will replace you tomorrow if they could, if they decide to. And then where will you find your value? You need to find it elsewhere. So very important. The life lessons we are learning today. Thank you so much. So when
So
you're setting boundaries now in your life, or when you set them at work, what's your go-to phrases on setting boundaries?
my go-to phrases is one, think about, obviously, like I said earlier, think about what's best for me. I also think about how is this going to affect other people. So, like for example, if we're working on, let's say, a project, right, with my team at work, we're working on a project, and it's taking, everybody on my team is like, hey, we're going to bang out till 8 o'clock at night to work on this project, right? I might have to say, hey, I'm not going to do that until 8 o'clock at night because I got other things going on. But what I'm willing to do is whatever my contribution is, I'll certainly get it done. If it's due the next day, I don't know, whatever time is due the next day, I'll get it done by the deadline. But I'm not going to stay with y'all. And this is hypothetical. My team hasn't done this. I'm just, but I just know that I would exclude myself from that. But in doing that, I would make sure that I communicate with other people and
Mm.
let them know. I wouldn't just like not show up to the group huddle or the midnight workathon, but I would say something, because what you do affects other people. Another boundary, and this kind of went back to something that you mentioned earlier, but another boundary is when you are on a vacation, when you are off work. Oh my goodness. So many people be like, but if you really need me, contact. No, you text me. Don't contact me at all. Whatever it is, unfortunately, we're gonna have to deal with it when I come back. But in saying that, I know that I want to structure my work so that when I'm getting close to leaving, which I'm actually going on vacation next week. So when I'm getting close to leaving, I want to be able to slow things down. Want
Mm.
to be able to inform my team of projects and tasks that I'm working on so that the burden is not thrown on them to figure things out. And I want to communicate with other partners, people that I'm working with, to say like, hey, during this time, I'm gonna be out. Once I come back, I'm happy to pick this back up. But I'm not gonna put on my away message, hey, but if you really need me, call me. And I know some people that do that. I'm not doing that.
I love that you're so in tune with yourself that before this vacation, I want to slow down. I think a lot of people are fearful even of putting in that PTO because they're like, I know once I come back, it's going to be like 60 emails or 75. But have you had that conversation with yourself on what you need and what you don't want from your team?
Yeah.
Um,
And what I schedule when I come back, I think the first maybe day or two that I come back, I don't have a lot of meetings and things. So I have time
mm,
to look back and check the emails. I put it all on my calendar. And I'm not saying that I'm doing everything perfect. And I'm also not saying that I was always like this. These are practices, again, it's an ongoing thing. So I'm trying to get better, as I go different years, different jobs. But that's something that I proactively did.
And I love that you're admitting to us that this hasn't been the case always. Could you kind of talk about a time where you wish you had set a boundary at work and you didn't, and it ended up kind of not so positively?
Yeah. I mean, I just, even when I think about the PTO piece, I remember working places. I think maybe even at my last job when I was off, or I think I may have even been sick, and someone contacted me about something work related or job related, and I just was like, hey, in my mind, I was like, hey, I don't want to talk about this, but in that moment, I did it. Right, I had the discussion. I picked up the phone. I took time out of my PTO. Right, I might as well just be in the office if I'm gonna have a 30-minute meeting phone conversation with you about something that's work related. And sometimes people will make things urgent that are not that urgent. They'll make things like, we need today, I have to talk to you because, and it's like, nah, if you would have waited next week, it would have been the same outcome. It would have been fine. And so that's tough. That's a tough thing to kind of analyze in the moment, especially if it's something that you haven't gone through before.
Mm.
And I'm really big on like employee power and being able to advocate for yourself in the workplace, which is not always easy to do, especially when, like I said, people make everything is super urgent, or th- there's sometimes in workplaces there are practices where people are off, but they're not off, right?
Mm.
And so if everybody around you is putting on their PTO message like, "Hey, reach me if you need me," and then you're the person who's like, "Hey, don't reach me," you could become an outcast, even though it's like, like this is why do I have to subscribe to this just because y'all doing it? But it
Mhm.
can still make you feel like I'm out of the loop, people looking at me strange. And so it's not an easy practice to do.
Right. And that's also a lot of looking within yourself and saying, okay, how long can I do this? How long can I be an outcast? How long can I be out of the loop and feel like this? Because y'all don't know what healthy boundaries are. That's
Yep.
not my problem. But yeah, so it's a lot of looking within yourself. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. If you could share one more time of when you've had to set a boundary with a manager or maybe a coworker.
Mm. Thinking about a coworker. So I think definitely, and I think we spoke about this before when I was working in a school. And so one of my red flags, or one thing that I just don't tolerate, is like adults talking down about young people, especially in front of me. Like I just feel offended. I'm like, watch your tone, watch your language. Like, come on now, we're not gonna have that. And so there was a woman, a white teacher, that was very just belittling to a young girl who was in the school. This girl had built up a reputation of being a quote unquote bully, or just one of the kind of rougher girls in the school. I attribute that to a lot of her home environment. She's had a lot of difficulties. I met her mom and things like that. She had a lot of difficulties, and as a community, we have to continue to wrap our arms around all of our children, whether we like them, whether they are quote unquote favorite or not, they still a part of us. And so that's the way that I roll. And so this particular teacher, well, this student came to school one day, and the student had like a black eye. I guess she was in a fight. And this teacher just was like, "Oh, that's what that B get," called out her name, you know what I'm saying? And I'm just like, what? And so I kind of looked around just to see, like, is it just me? I'm just the only person that heard that. And so I had to pause for a second, because I just didn't, I don't understand how you would even come to a thought in your mind to, curse when saying, like, referencing a child, it's so wrong on so many levels. Anyway, later on, I ended up approaching the teacher, have an interaction with her, letting her know I didn't agree with the language. She didn't really, she kind of hit me with one of those things like, oh, that's just how I talk, or that's just how I was feeling. I can't remember the exact response, but I'm just like, man, like you're in the wrong profession then. Like this is not something that you should be doing, especially if you're saying it. So many folks have these mindsets, but you even willing to say it like blatantly. And so that's one of my boundaries. Like, watch the way that you talk about children around me. You know, do they have struggles, problems? Absolutely, 1,000%, especially in urban communities, especially in schools that I've worked in and been a part of. But it's a certain type of way that you talk about children, right? If you want to talk about your friends and whoever that way, go for it. But these are children that are still very malleable, and they're sponges, right? And we got to continue to pour into them. So that's one of my boundaries.
And what a very good boundary to have. I I need time to process that. What an awful educational leader. Like what?
Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. And once again, when you're in a room where you know that you have a personal boundary and nobody else is kind of leading the charge on setting that boundary that you all should be setting as a professional. Even I, as an HR professional, I've had that happen several times where people will come to us with sexual harassment claims or discrimination claims. And then everyone in the room will be like, well, we have to fire that person. I'm like, oh. And then I have to set that boundary for myself, saying, like, I don't agree with this at all. That is not the way we should handle this. We definitely should be going ABC and not all the way. What the
Right.
hell was that?
It's the same thing that schools do with suspension, right?
Mhm.
It's like, oh, you out of here. I mean, I grew up. I remember going to Catholic school, and one of my best friends, Eddie, who passed away, God bless his soul, the school hated him. Like we were young black kids going to this white Catholic school, and so anything he did, suspension, 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 until they suspended him enough to expel him from the school. Obviously he needed other supports. A suspension wasn't the thing that was helping him, and it rarely ever helps us really. But I agree with you. Going to that full limit. You got to have steps. You got to have interventions, in order to work things out.
And wow, so many good words found in this. I know that you mentioned that this work is very personal to you, specifically for Black youth, and that's why you are the founder of your own LLC to empower them especially in the hiring process with your brand new book.
Mhm.
Um, why do you why do you stay in this field even though it's kind of heart-wrenching and you kind of there's a lot of systems in place that are kind of pinned against you? Why do
Yeah.
you stay in this field?
Because I'm needed. Black men are needed in education. Black men are needed to be mentors, to work with youth. We are missing from the conversations. We're not valued enough. We're not seen enough, and so my presence is needed in the space. And so that's why I'm here. And I also know the value of so many Black men who poured into me. Whether it was my dad, I still talk to my sixth grade social studies teacher. I still talk to my 10th grade U.S. history teacher. And so I just see the value in it. And I know that the long-term implications far outweigh the trivial day-to-day kind of drama that you deal with. I think the last time I checked, in public education, at least, only 2% of the teachers are Black men, right? So that's an issue, that's a problem. And that's something that, I feel like one of the ways that you challenge that and that you work towards eliminating that is getting more Black men in education. And there's plenty of research out there that also suggests that Black teachers, especially Black men, they have a positive influence on all students, not even just Black students, but on all students. And it's missing. And so, I'm one of a bunch of other people, to try to help try to help with that problem, and try to help pour into my community, which is, the utmost thing, I think of when I think about myself and my family and everything.
Mhm. And that positive impact is definitely being brought here today on Absolutely Not. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences in setting boundaries and your journey with such. This is the part of the show where I open it up to the floor. Feel free to use the chat or come off mute and ask Albert any questions about his book, about his career and education, about his positive impact, and most especially about boundaries. So go ahead. Let me check the chat. Nobody. I have one question for you. Who has helped you so far in your journey for setting boundaries? Has anyone helped you in this journey?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of mentors that I have in different capacities. When it comes to employment, I mean, my dad, I mean, he's a person who has left jobs, he's walked away from opportunities because people were not willing to respect his boundaries. Um, I literally remember helping him pack up his office at a previous job. He was like, somebody asked me to do something crazy. I told him I wasn't going to do it multiple times. They kept asking me. So yeah, I'm going to transition to something else. So my dad is definitely one of them. Um, and then, some people is not as explicit, right? It's not like somebody saying like, hey, this is how you set boundaries, but you just kind of watch people, you kind of watch how they work, how they interact with people, how they show up. And so I think that's one of my coworkers now. Her name is Shanae. I love the way that she shows up at work, because she gives 100,000% at work, but once it's over, she's given 100,000% to her own life,
Mhm.
outside of her 9 to 5, which I really appreciate. So just watching people, I think, is important. And different places that I work, I always find kind of like a mentor there.
Mhm.
Usually someone older, someone who is more experienced than I am, has more knowledge and wisdom than I possess. And you just, I just attached to them, just
Mhm.
naturally to soak up game.
Awesome. I'm so glad you were able to find positive mentors in any of the organizations you are a part of. But I'm so glad that your dad was like a huge influence for you. That a lot of people's parental figures or maybe their older mentors have the opposite effect. They're saying like, no, stay at that job for a long time. It's good money, has a good pension, but yeah, change that narrative.
For sure. Yeah, my dad was, he trusted me to when I originally graduated from undergrad with a degree in journalism, even before I went to Morgan State and I told him, hey, I want to do journalism, I don't think he ever agreed with that decision because he was like, well, how much money you gonna make? And so he would show me like Department of Labor, the statistics and things like that around like what jobs are paying and what careers, are high wage. And I was like, that's nice, but I still feeling this, I'm still feeling this career path. And so he trusted me. He trusted I'm gonna make the right decisions, when it comes to employment. And he knows that when I'm done, I'm done. Um, and fortunately, I have him around.
I'm so glad that he's around. I love your use of the word trust because a lot of this boundaries setting stuff and even empowerment comes with trusting ourselves, our abilities, and the decisions that we're making for our lives. So it's a lot of trust, and having people around you that you feel trusting you helps you in trusting yourself. So that's
Mhm.
great.
Sweet.
Um, Let me check the chat one more time. Y'all don't have no questions? Okay, that's fine. I have more questions for you. Do you have any coping mechanisms that you use currently to kind of help you set healthier boundaries in your lives?
There's a ton, and it's funny because in my book I actually wrote a chapter about relieving stress. Because, you know,
Mm.
work, your job is one of the biggest stressors in your life, you know, it can be. And so there's so many things that I try to make, again, like life practices. So whether I was working somewhere or not, these are things that I want to do because I feel like they're beneficial to me as a person and my health. So aromatherapy, um, going outside, getting fresh air. Like sometimes, like I, especially now, we spend so much time just like staring at a computer screen, and then we go outside and it's like nighttime because we didn't spend all day in front of our computer. So I don't know if it's a boundary or not, but just making sure that I get some fresh air and some sunshine. Like even after this, I'm gonna go to not a park, but like a lake that's not too far away from my house, just to walk around and chill. So that's really important to me. I started therapy not too long ago, and that's been really helpful. Just again, outside of work, these are things that I just find valuable, just as a man, as a black man, you know, just as being myself. Um, what else? Uh, trying to get my diet a little better. Uh, stay away from so many of the sweets and the treats that are always out here enticing me. So you know, working on that. But there's so many things that people can do, and it's really dependent upon who you are, what your experience is, you know, how you want to value yourself, how you want to live for yourself. And you know, people have a million practices. Like I said earlier, I watch people, and so I might pick up something from this person. I might pick up something from that person. Even I have a plant in my office now, which is helpful to me. And that's something I picked up from so many other people who like, I was like, man, I always wanted a plant on my desk. Um, but beyond just like the visual aesthetic of it, like it's actually healthy for the environment, right? Like it's healthy for the space. So all of those things, just getting them from other people.
I love it. And I think it's important to remind anyone in the audience or anyone listening that it's okay to pick things up and put them down if they're not for you. Like if for some reason Albert picked up the plant and was like, this is cool, but I don't like this anymore. He could move on to aromatherapy, lake sitting, people watching, reading, writing a whole book. Yeah, there's so many things. And if it doesn't work for you, just put it back down. It's fine.
Firework.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have any of your coworkers ever helped you set boundaries at work? Whenever you had to set a boundary with somebody, did anybody ever back you up?
Um, yeah, for sure. And like I said, almost anywhere I work, I might have a mentor, but then I also have a set of coworkers who, you know, we're tight. That's my clique. You know, when it comes to eat lunch, you know, we eat lunch, or when it comes to project, I'm like, yeah, I want to work with that person. You know, I have those people at different workplaces, and so typically, if I have to set a boundary in the workplace, obviously I'll consult my own damn self because I'm grown. But I also I'm happy to consult with coworkers, to people that I really trust though. So it's
Mhm.
very, very like it's not everybody, it's not a whole group, but it's people that I'm real close to. And I'll propose like, hey, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about that? Or you know, just to get their perspective. And you know, you have to have discernment. Some people might give you advice and thoughts, like you said, putting stuff down. Some people might say things that you completely disagree with, or you're like, they're telling you not to do it, and you're like, I'm gonna do it anyway. Um, you know, I remember there was a coworker who I was trying to approach. I didn't quite know how to approach her about something, and so I talked to another coworker who I really trusted, and they were like, "Well, just let it go. That's just how the person is." And I'm like, "No, I'm not letting it."
Mm,
That might have been how they've been their whole life, but with me, that's not how they're gonna be.
mhm.
So we're gonna have to figure out a different way to communicate with each other. So just you know, bounce ideas off of people and use discernment, and most of the time it works out. You know, sometimes it doesn't.
That's awesome. And what would you say to the people out there that are probably freaking out right now and saying, "Well, I don't have discernment. Where do I get it from?"
You know, you have to get it from yourself, really. You know, but it takes time to build it up. And
Mm,
so I would say, you know, talk to your parents, talk to older people,
mm,
talk to people who have lived experience that they can share with you. and in order to help you build that up. And maybe even think about, maybe you do have it, but maybe you don't have it in a workplace, right? So
Mm.
maybe you've had it when you were growing up, right? I'm sure somebody has told you something or provided you with some thoughts that you were like, I'm not really feeling that. So I appreciate them for saying it, but I'm not going to do that. That's not something that I'm going to do. And so they probably have it, but find ways to tap into it more, and to really call it, right? Call it out,
Mm.
and say like, oh, this is an example of me doing it in the past. How can I bring that into who I am now? How can I bring that to a different situation, a different environment? So really tapping into that, and it's step by step. This is a practice. This is a muscle that we working together. So I'm sure that people will figure it out.
And I'm so thankful that you keep saying the word practice, because a lot of people are under the assumption that, okay, boundaries, got them. Now I'm just going to go out there and be like, no, no, get out my way. No, no, no. You have to practice this, and you have to be consistent with it. Just like you said, that person in your office, they've been acting like this their whole life. So they might come back after you set the boundary and say the same thing that you just said, don't say that. What would you say, some words of encouragement on people on being consistent in their boundaries?
Yeah, just remember the end goal. Remember
Mm.
the end goal of you placing that boundary. Why did you even want to create it in the first place? What's the significance of it? So keeping that at the top of mind, because like you said, it is easy. You might set a boundary, you might go against it, right? I got this. I'm not gonna put my work email on my phone boundary. I don't know. I don't have it in my heart right now that I'm gonna do it next week. But let's say I put it on there next week. I need to be able to say, "Whoa, what am I doing?" Right? I need Katrina to be like, we had a whole episode. You said that you wasn't gonna do it. What are you doing?" So just reminding yourself, and I remind myself of that peace of mind, that a little bit more peace of mind that I have now that is not on my phone. And I remember what it was like before, and how it could be a distraction, how it could take you away from your reality of what you're dealing with right now, because you're constantly looking up work stuff. Because we want to do good work, we want to be good at what we do.
Mhm.
I think people want that inherently, but you got to still place boundaries on what that means, and what that looks like. So remember the end goal, and it's not always easy to do, but remember the end goal. Maybe set, let's say for instance, I was a person who was like, but I gotta check my email all the time, I'm gonna be lost. Maybe I said, if I cut it cold turkey, but if it was harder for me to do that, maybe I'll say, look, um, on certain days I won't look at it, or certain times.
Mhm.
So taking those steps, because I know ultimately I want to get to that point, but it takes time. Just like
Mhm.
you getting a workout routine, or setting a new diet, right? Like it's I don't know many people who can say on Monday, hey, I'm starting this thing, and then Tuesday they're perfect at it and they're never going back. you know.
Right. And it reminds me of all the personal boundaries I've set for myself recently. Recently, I started walking about a mile a day. But let me tell you, week one, I only did it one time. Week two, I only did it like two times, maybe like one and a half times. It just takes time. I now have that boundary like, no, at 7 o'clock, we're going to stop whatever we're doing and go for this walk, because and the end goal is to live a healthier life. Oh man, that angle is so important. So I encourage anybody who's listening out there to please take Albert's words and just think about your end goal whenever you're setting a boundary, and make sure that end goal is safety for you, empowerment in yourself, and living the best life that you want to live.
Because at the end of the day, if you are your best self, then you can do so much more, and you can radiate so much more, and you can support so many other people, right? So it's about you, but it's not just about you. You're a
Mm.
person that really believes in your community and your family and all of these things, then you being your best self is essential to that whole puzzle.
You hear that, people? Essential. It is essential that you set boundaries and have a healthy life. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. My last question for you today is going to be, what are the top 3 tips you have for young professionals that are thinking about moving into education, are worried about what's going to happen when they move into it, and about setting boundaries?
Yeah, well, education has shifted so much, especially during this pandemic. There are teachers who've been teaching for 15, 20 years that when this pandemic hit and everything switched virtual, they became like a first year teacher. They were like, wait, how do you do this? And so when it comes to education, I would say that if that's something that you're interested in transitioning to, if possible, I would say volunteer, like spend some time in some classrooms, spend some times maybe even in some after school programs, like build up that muscle of just working around and with young people before you just jump into a classroom and you want to lead your own classroom. Like spend some time with other teachers and spend some time with different teachers, right? Spend some time with the teachers who maybe first, second year, third year, and then also spend some time with some teachers who maybe been in there for 10, 15, 20 years, right? Maybe a little longer, just to be able to compare and contrast, pick up practices. So that's one thing I recommend too, is there are many teaching programs that help professionals who are interested in making a career change.
Mm.
So in Baltimore, and I'm sure they have these in many other cities and states throughout the country, they have urban teachers, they have Baltimore City Teaching Residency, they have Teach for America. There are all these different teaching programs. So just research, see which one maybe is best for you. If you don't have that traditional education background, but you're like, hey, I want to make a change, I want to try something different. Um, and thirdly, when it comes to boundaries, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you know, teachers, it's very easy to eliminate boundaries because there's so much to do. You want to talk to every parent all the time. You want to talk to every child. You want to do mentoring. You're like a counselor. You're like a therapist. Like you have all these different roles wrapped up into one as just being an educator. But making sure that you say that, hey, at a certain time, at a certain point, we got to cut it off every day. When it comes to not even just that, but lesson planning. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. I'm not in the classroom right now. I work for my school district, but these things continue. And so some things are universal, right? Building a boundary is a transferable skill, really. It may look differently depending on where you are, but it's something that you're gonna have to do no matter where you go. So just keeping that in mind. Educators are great. So if that's something that you choose to do, I think you're gonna love it. I think you're gonna find a lot of value out of it. And lastly, when I was a teacher, especially my first year, I wanted like immediate change in my students. Like if I taught them something, or if we were working on a particular skill, or even if I was helping someone with their behavior, they were just like acting crazy sometimes. I wanted it to be an immediate change, but I had to realize that sometimes things take time, right? Sometimes you're planting seeds that in fifth grade you might not see until they get in high school, and then you like, I remember when you was in my class break dancing in the middle of my history lesson. Now you're getting a scholarship to go to college, right? And so those things take time, but being willing to acknowledge that, and not thinking that, oh, just in your span of your school year, your class, everything's going to change immediately.
Oh my gosh. That last part makes me so happy just because it it covers everything we talked about. This stuff takes time. Behavior takes time. Transitioning into education, if you make that decision, it's gonna take time. Learning about new skills is gonna take time. And I think us as a society, we try to speed up processes a lot. Like we try to zoom past things, but a lot of this is just gonna take time, including boundaries, including changes we want to see in this society. So thank you so much for sharing that. Are there any golden nuggets from y'all hiring that you want to share, or a little sneak peek of the book so I can buy it?
Yeah, for sure. So the book, one of my favorite parts of the book, obviously I wrote it, so a lot is my favorite. But one of my favorite parts is just the tips that come at the end of some of the chapters. So even if you're like, hey, I don't want to, and the book is not super long, it's just 88 pages. But if you're like, hey, I don't want to read all of the parts of the book, I just want to get to the tips. You can go right in and look for those little, it may be hard to see on camera, but you can look for those light bulbs, right? Like ding, and you can just read that. And the book also doesn't have to be read in order. So if you're like, I want to start at the end, or I want to have my teenagers start at the end, that's fine. You pick where you want to start. I just encourage you to read the intro. The intro is going to set the book up for you and set expectations. But then after that, you can go wherever you want to go with it.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so glad you wrote a book. But thank you so much for being my special guest today. I cannot thank you enough. If nobody has any questions for Albert, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Once again, this has been Absolutely Not. I am your host, Katrina Stroll. My special guest today was Albert Phillips Jr. He is doing amazing work. Please reach out to him if you need help with employment or if you need help at perspectives of, or if you need a perspective from a Black male teacher. He's definitely the person to reach out to so that you can learn more. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.